Hi, I'm Hannah, and you are listening to the L&D Leaders podcast. We talk about what it really takes to make learning collaborative, connected to everyday work, and part of how organizations actually grow. In this episode, we are talking about learning as energy. We are exploring what leadership development looks like when complexity is no longer just a phase, but rather a permanent reality of modern work. What does it mean to treat leadership not just as a program, but as a daily practice? And how do we build organizations where learning doesn't train people, but actually fuels performance, clarity, and also well-being? My guest today is David Goddard. Thank you so much, David, for being here with me today.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for the invitation. It's lovely to be here.
You are a leadership coach and consultant with over 25 years of experience working with leaders and teams globally in more than 50 countries. I have been inspired by the way you talk about designing leadership programs and leadership development for organizations that are navigating with matrix structures, multicultural teams, and constant transformation. What really stands out to me is that you are not only talking about the performance, but you are instead talking about building leadership that is creating clarity, sustainable impact, and the energy that I really look forward to dive deeper today as well.
Thank you for that introduction, Hannah. That sounds like a podcast I'd like to join, actually. That sounds really cool topics. A little bit about myself. So originally from the UK, but I've been living here in Finland for some considerable part of that 25 years. In fact, it might even be slightly more than that now. So these days, I don't know, I'm a British Finn or a Finnish Brit, one or the other. I have my own business. I'm an entrepreneur. My business is Successify. It's a leadership development service. But I don't like to work alone. So I'm a solo entrepreneur that doesn't enjoy being on his own, and I collaborate regularly. I spend at least 80% of my time as president of the Nordic Leadership Network, which is an association of independent leadership development coaches who, like me, would rather work together and collaborate and scale up on projects than work in a traditional firm or work completely alone. We get called in usually when there's organization is going for a change process, or they're dealing with those complexities, or that they want to tie their learning into their leadership and into their daily work.
Wow, sounds really fascinating, and I look forward to hear more of those stories. But before we dive deeper, what's a small daily habit that helps you learn or stay curious in your everyday?
Thank you for the question. Curiosity is one of my favorite words. So protecting my thinking time. So I have some habits in the morning, usually. So a couple of things that I do that help me stay curious to what's coming during the course of the day, rather than just sort of, jumping straight into the inbox and then responding to that. So I do the Daily Telegraph cryptic crossword every day.
Oh.
It takes me 15, 20 minutes. Occasionally I have to leave something for the evening, but I find it completely resets my brain and it actually just gets going. So the point is to do something non-work related. And the other thing that I have as a daily habit in the morning is that I always start my day with a blank piece of paper. And I have a blank piece of paper that I have on a clipboard, and I've got lots of coloured pencils and pens. But I usually sketch out, what do I need to do today? What's coming? What's the questions that I need to ask in that meeting that's coming up? Rather than being sabotaged by responding to WhatsApp messages or, the stuff that comes in.
Sounds good. I was just wondering that I should have one of those, actually, just to get from blank canvas in the morning. That would be really, really lovely. So probably I will take one of those as well. You have a really extensive background in leadership development. What were the key turning points for you that shaped how you actually think about leadership and learning today?
Key turning points. Well, there's been a few, but a few that stand out. So in my early career, I was a cross-cultural trainer, and my work was often as a troubleshooter. Like, company had brought subsidiary, and they're saying, there's miscommunications happening, and they don't understand each other's cultures. But I came to understand fairly quickly in that work that usually the cross-cultural thing was masking the real problem, which was actually often connected with leadership. So once you strip away the cultural differences in, let's say, in how we communicate or how we're using time or those usual things, if the fundamentals in the company or the team are right, that we know what we're doing, we know where we're going, and we trust each other, then the communication things actually become interesting. And it's cool that somebody is different like that. But usually it presented as a cross-cultural challenge, and you
Mhm.
dig down and it was actually a leadership challenge. And that really led me into leadership. And then I got into coaching. In coaching, I would say that I discovered that actually all leadership starts with self-leadership. And that if the leader, one of a very particular incident was one of my customers rather brutally expressed once at the start of a leadership development program. He stood up in front of the team that I was working with, and he said, if you can't lead yourself, you don't deserve to have subordinates. And I thought that was quite um, strongly worded, but anyway, I think everybody got the point that, take care of yourself first. So there was that. And then lately with the Nordic Leadership Network, I really have come to understand that my learning around leadership and development in general, it's through the beauty and the joy of collaboration. And that when I have collaborators, I have people that I can bounce things off of. You can get feedback. It makes it all so much richer. So I really think, 1+1 really does equal 3 when we've got that opportunity.
How do you see where is the most important or most meaningful learning actually happening? You already touched upon talking about collaboration, that when you are consulting together with your peer.
Well, the learning often happens between the learning moments, if that makes sense. So these days, most of the programs that I do are learning journeys, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. I even have one going on at the moment that's a year long. And people find that their learning happens in between the formal moment. So a quick answer would be that it's always on the job, and it's when you're applying the learning. And what I feel has changed in the leadership development space that certainly that I'm occupying is that customers are looking for more opportunities to build in the learning moments. So obviously, if you have a mandated workshop on time management or something, or energy management or whatever it is, you might bring in some certain content, but it's finding the opportunity that people can reflect and then reflect together in discussion and dialogue and then share in a wider group, which might be back to the rest of their team, or it might be up to their line manager, or it might be with a customer. It's not rocket science, and it's not bringing in fantastic new ideas for people. It's more refresh, renew, reapply. And the question is more not so much what are you learning, but what are you unlearning or what are you relearning? I think that's a very consistent theme also in the feedback that we get, that people say, well, actually, it was amazing. It's like there was not so much that was absolutely new for me, but it was really interesting to see what this topic means now.
Yes, yeah, for sure. If I hear correct, you are talking quite a lot about the transition or the transformation within those organizations when it comes to organizational structures, when it comes to the speed of change, when it comes to how we are actually developing the leadership. I think that we are coming close to one of my favorite topics, at least the complexity, and how do we really operate when the change is constant and when there is really a high pressure in those organizations and for those leaders I imagine you are collaborating with. But how do you see learning and leadership development evolving within organizations when the complexity and the uncertainty are not just temporary things anymore, but permanent state?
Well, I saw some research from the Neuro Leadership Group recently on their SCARF model, if you come across that the need for stability had gone down. I was looking at that and I think it was perhaps it's the expectation around stability has decreased because everybody knows that things are happening very unpredictably and chaotically at the moment in our operating environments. But then on the other hand, it does two things. So I think one is that it increases the need for anchor points. So, what am I really tied to, or what are we tied to in our team? So what are our values? What's our mission, our vision, our goals, and so forth? Why are we doing this stuff? And what do we want to get from each other in this? And it shows up. We have different conversations with people. So in the past, I used to ask people at the beginning of a program, what are your expectations? Maybe what do you want to learn more about? But these days, we often ask them, what are you bringing to the learning journey? Rather than what do you hope to get out of it, but what are you bringing to it? So it is shifting the conversation. The other thing that it's doing is, I think that you absolutely put your finger on it, is more about complexity. So one of the questions I ask people right at the beginning of a development program is, how many teams are you part of at the moment? Many people say they're part of multiple teams. Sometimes they have to really think, am I part of this team or am I not part of that team? I'm not sure. Maybe 6.5. And I think, well, teams play against each other. So how do you decide which team you're going to play for in the morning, today? And then how many projects are you working in? And a few people are lucky enough that they only got one project that they're working on. But most people are working on multiple projects at the same time. So we have this huge demands on our attention, and that we have that energy cost when you swap from having a discussion with a customer to having a discussion with a team member. And these days, if you're doing that sort of thing at home, in between, somebody might ask you, well, it's actually your turn to unload the dishwasher. And and then the dog barks. And it's just like, okay. So back to what I was saying in the beginning about my daily habits. One of the things that I think comes up very much in our programs is, how do we protect our thinking time? And our thinking time, of course, is absolutely connected to our learning time. And if we don't have time to stop and think, then how do we capture the learning along the way? So in the project environment, it might be that the previous model would be that, you do a project and at the end of it, you collect the lessons learned and think, how do I use those in my next project? And these days, it's got to be lessons learning all the way through.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you are kind of putting together really, really big and acute themes, from complexity to really setting the purpose, like how you described what is our vision, where are we heading, what do we want to achieve together. Then that sounds to me like a lot of context changes within our everyday work when we're coming from project or team to another, and changing the context a lot, which also of course have a big effect on our mind. Then talking about the performance, the big pressure that we are having, there are really, really big themes, taking care of our well-being, and then also being constantly learning, being constantly curious on new things. And then, as I know, one of your big passions is still the social learning perspective, the collaboration, what it means for those leaders to actually find the time to learn together and make the difference through the collaboration. So where do you see that theme still kind of sitting in that map, the social or collaborative learning? What is the biggest difference that is actually bringing to the game today?
Maybe I could mention one of my customers at the moment is Wärtsilä, Finnish energy and technology company. At Wärtsilä, they have a very explicit approach to learning. So they have events like Learn and Grow Days going on, so it's like, yes, explicitly acknowledging that we're a learning organization and we need to learn faster than the world is changing. Otherwise, we're in the wrong place. So I think that's one thing. But the other is really, it's a mindset thing. I hesitate to use the word culture, but how do you build that learning culture inside your organization? But if you have the growth mindset embedded, you're all the time, you're looking for opportunities to learn. At the end of a meeting, if your team we have a growth mindset, at the end of a meeting, it's just naturally, hey, what did we learn from this meeting today? And it's not like, did we meet our targets? Did we tick off all the items on the agenda? And that also builds in a little bit of a feedback loop as well. So, and you hear people keep asking these questions. And I think it's also quite a good measurement for me as well inside organizations of trying to understand, how do things shift? Because, of course, my customers are always interested in return on investment. and it's very hard to show, okay, we changed the numbers here. But what you do notice is that conversations start to change and people say things like, well, I feel a bit more energized now because, hey, our team meetings have gone from being, here I'm not quoting a particular customer, but, our team meetings have gone from being stale and dry and formulaic to being actually quite inspiring. Yeah, they are big themes, but also I think when you got the right mindset, it's easy to make one or two small changes.
Yeah. I can feel in my body that the energy is now like kind of leveling up, and I'm like, okay, tell me more, like concrete examples. And what does that actually mean? And there are like so big topics from learning organization to how to measure learning and leading the energy within our teams. And of course, leading the leader's energy. And that is also a big part of the self-leadership part as well. But if learning really isn't happening in isolation, what are the concrete steps? How can we really learn together? And how can we help our leaders to learn together more?
Well, I could mention another customer, which is Rayler's engineering technology company. And the CEO, who's Finnish, Jarmo Suominen, he is extremely pro-learning. And I think that sets a great example throughout the whole organizations. They have a tagline, that the home of the learning minds, which I really, really like. But when you see the CEO embodying that, then it really sends out a message. So, of course, this is easy to say, but it is one thing that organizations can do. And I find that out very quickly. Me or my team, we've been called in, and you notice that this organization is actually not that serious about the learning because we can't engage the top leadership. And in both of those customers that I mentioned, I feel that we're very well supported in what we're trying to do with the leadership. And of course, we're aligned and there's a connection between what we're trying to do. We're trying to energize people, but we're trying to energize people for a purpose, which is often there's a strategic purpose behind it. And the organization that understands that, we need to learn, we need to stay healthy, and we need to be productive. And that the three things are absolutely linked together. You can only be concentrating wholly on productivity for a short time because sooner or later you're not going to feel good. And if you don't feel good, then you're going to be productive. And if you're not productive and you're not feeling good, you sure as hell ain't learning anything. So these three things are really, people talk about work-life balance, but I think it's more like trying to find the harmony between these three things.
Yeah, thank you for sharing Wärtsilä and Reiler's stories. I think that those are really, really inspiring. Is it so that these organizations are just forerunners, or do you think that this is really the direction where organizations are heading?
They are very invested in this learning and energy and all of those things that come with it. And it goes up and down, but there are organizations that say that they're invested in it and aren't. And then, of course, there are organizations that, maybe are yet to really discover the value of it.
At least when I am working with bigger corporations, I quite often see and also get the similar kind of feedback from our L&D leaders community, that people are talking about how to get people involved and how to get the importance of learning and those leadership programs, for example, to fit those into busy experts and leaders tables and to get them to teach, to share, to help their colleagues, to learn from each others. So how do you see that pattern? Like, is it easy to really get people to join that leadership development program? Or is it possible to somehow make learning as a daily practice or really a part of our everyday work?
Sometimes it's difficult to get people in, but once they're in, usually they see the value very, very quickly because you make them stop. Stop. And just, think, how am I doing this stuff? How do I show up? How does the team see me? What does the team need from me? What do I bring to the team? And so a lot of leadership development programs have value created through the social learning that you mentioned, peer-to-peer reflection. And that is so valuable to people because it's absolutely amazing. Sometimes in a call from Wärtsilä, I have people from 15 different countries. And you've got somebody from Vaasa and somebody from Panama, and they discover, once they get over all the cross-cultural differences, they discover that actually, they're facing the same problems. Then the cross-cultural beauty kicks in because maybe they have slightly different solutions to the same problems, but it's very or same opportunities. It doesn't have to be about problems. It could be very positive things. So that social learning and learning from each other, peer reflection, and finding methodologies in any leadership development program that really builds that into the curriculum. It's a learning journey, and set people up with feedback buddies or accountability partnerships or communities of practice. And of course, in the house space, you have a very nice tool that helps promote that social engagement. And that's one of the things that I like very much. Of course, leadership want people to be engaged. And I mean, that's been there all the way through my career. But maybe to answer your first question around this is that maybe the relevance and importance of it is increasing. And especially the more AI comes in, then the more human we need to be in our working practices, because there's so much that we do at the moment that AI will do. What does it leave us to do? And it leaves us to do things that AI can't do, which is make people really feel something deeply with another person, and that, or with a team of people. So, for example, I've been working with another collaborator on an AI coaching tool, and it's really good and it can go so far. And then there's part of the AI coaching where you make a commitment about, okay, this is like a habit that I'm going to change or something like this. And it's really good. And I tried it myself, even though I was in the development of it. And I actually changed something with a colleague in a conversation pattern that we got into. And I found that really valuable. Making that commitment to another human being, which is what I then did with my colleague, that made it so much more real, because there's somebody human that can come back to me and say, hey. So building in more opportunities for connection is going to boost the engagement. And when the other part of the engagement is that, and this cuts across any cultures, I think, people want to be seen and heard. So people want to be appreciated. I think it's a fundamental human driver. And getting appreciation from ChatGPT is okay. And sometimes, it's scary how ChatGPT over time starts to mimic its master, because my one is getting quite sarcastic with me at the moment, but it's not the same as laughing with you. I think that organizations, if they want to boost engagement, running development programs is a great way to do it, but really looking for those opportunities, how we learn together, because that's also another fundamental human driver. I really do believe everybody wants to learn. And the day that you've lost interest in learning anything, quite advanced down the path of life.
Definitely, and I'm 100% with you there.
The context is always really important. So how are people challenged to use that learning in their day-to-day work, and how will they share the learning with the rest of their team? And when you've got a customer that is speaking that same language, then it's really easy, because you get that support from the management, and people come with the expectation that my line manager is interested in what I'm doing, and that I'm going to share it back with them, or my team. And so it's built into the culture, and connecting those learning journeys to other things. So you might have a guest speaker from another part of the organization that comes in and says, hey, this is what we're trying to do in this department over here, connect with that. Or sending people off to, why don't you just sit in the, if you want to learn a bit more about what's going on in the finance department, why don't you just ask, can I sit in one of your next team meetings? It's just like, you get to know people, but you also get some insights into their daily challenges. So I think the old idea that you would take people really out of the workplace, take them off into the woods and sort of feed in their learning, and this is your learning moment. I really think that has disappeared. But the best clients for me are the ones that understand this is, it's a continuous process.
Yeah. To me, that sounds like your programs often have quite a clear structure, but there is still like a lot of interaction and reflection. And then at the same time, if I'm correct, that means that the participants really need to take quite a lot of accountability of the development and of their changing their daily routines. So how are you then creating that accountability for learning and for change to really happen without tipping people into stress or compliance or performance anxiety?
Well, first thing is to look at myself and make sure that I don't keep stepping into that gap. So I've learned there's a lot of stuff that I need to let go of. So the old me or younger me would have, if a customer would say, well, this is not clear, I would step in and try to make it clear for them. But these days I realize much more people do need to take responsibility for their own learning. And then how do you encourage them to do that? Well, most of the programs that I do inside organizations are voluntary open enrollment or nomination process. But anyway, people do have some autonomy over when and where they go to one of these journeys to some degree, usually, which I think helps that people have stepped into it. But it's a lot about what you do right at the beginning and how you set it up and how you start with people and asking those questions at the beginning. What do you bring into the learning journey? Being curious, what's going on in your world? How many teams you're in? How many projects you're in? All of that before you start hitting with people. Okay, and like, here's the first module and it's on strategic thinking. But so it might sometimes feel like a bit of a slow build up, but it gives people the opportunity to really lean into what's happening. So I make sure that there's always some pre-work that people have to do even before we meet them, and that there is lots of points of contact along the way. And there's all those things that I mentioned, feedback partnerships, accountability partnerships, communities of practice, all of these things, and sometimes all in the same program as well, So, and then me and the team, our role is more of the sort of like curators of the learning process.
David, I know one of the topics that are really close to your heart that is not mentioned yet today is the psychological safety. As I know that you have been working with so multicultural teams that you also described there before. How do you see that perspective affecting on leadership development, and how do you navigate there between cultural expectations?
That's a great question. Thank you. There's a little bit to unpack in that. I have a podcast, quick advert, Nordic Leaders Podcast, and I recently fed all of the scripts from transcripts from about 70 episodes into ChatGPT, and quickly identified trust was one of the most common words used in leadership podcast. And I think the connection to the psychological safety, of course, is that trust is like a indicator. If the psychological safety is there, people feel trusted, and also people are able to trust. And the connection to the multicultural world is very interesting because we have a trust questionnaire, which basically is along the lines of what builds trust for you, and many dimensions to it. But we find that the answers are often different between cultures. So like here in the Nordic area, in Finland, if you ask somebody in Finland what builds trust, they'll say, keep your promises. It's a strong Finnish response. So in the Nordic area, people are thinking reliability is a trust builder. And of course, reliability and keeping your promises is very important everywhere. But if I ask the question in Southern Europe, for example, or my customers in the Middle East, their answers would be much more relationship-based. It's much more interpersonal and human in terms of, so it's not so much about action. It's more like, you understand my feelings, or it's more emotional or relational or interpersonal. So trust works differently in different cultures. And if you start to think about building psychological safety in an organization that is multicultural, then I come back to the word that I was using earlier, is mindset, that in the end you can build in practices and so forth. But if you've got the right mindset, then you will be looking out to see what was the dynamic in that last team meeting. Who did all the talking? Who got talked over? It's always the same two people that do all the talking. Who was invited into the conversation? Who was excluded? So when we have the right mindset, we notice more and we're more curious and we ask more questions. that is also a very consistent outcome from the development programs that we do, is that leaders ask more questions. And asking more questions helps people be seen and heard. And sometimes it's actually, of course, asking better quality questions as well. If we're asking questions with the right heart and we're being genuinely curious in the right way, then the psychological safety increases because the trust gets stronger and people feel, okay, he or she might not be very culturally fluent, or they might not be totally emotionally aware, or, there's all sorts of things that might happen, but they know at least they care about me and they're interested. When we ask the right questions and we're being curious, then I think that the psychological safety increases, the trust level goes up, people feel more energized. And when the psychological safety is high, people feel free to be themselves. And that's very energizing, because it's not being yourself is a huge energy drainer. If you have to put on a face or a mask or a different attitude, or, leave some part of yourself at home, that is really de-energizing.
Oh, yes, definitely. Earlier, you already mentioned the ROI and how to measure learning and learning success. Since collaborative or social learning doesn't really show up in completion rates, how do we know that it is actually working? What are the signals that you are personally looking for when talking about these leadership development programs and learning overall, when we're talking about how it has an effect on changing behavior or supporting our relationships or speeding up our decision making, or what are the metrics?
Well, there's two that I use quite consistently. One is that at the end of towards the end of every program, you ask people to share what's been the impact. So we run an impact evaluation, and you run it before the program finishes. And it's basically, what have you already taken into use? And the end of a program is always described in our team as not the end of the journey. It's a checkpoint in the journey. But then the other, is a little bit more informal, is just to look and see and hear, how has the quality of conversation changed? The quality of the dialogue inside the organization, because that's something that everybody feels. So how do you feel after your team meeting? Are you looking forward to the next team meeting? So what's the energy level with people? And that energy level often presents in the quality of the dialogue and how people handle themselves under pressure.
And there we're talking about quite the big cultural change as well within the organization. Hey, let's move towards our last question and look a bit ahead. If you would imagine 5 years from now, what would be the skills or what would be the mindset you believe every L&D leader will need in the future? And how can they already start developing that today?
I think in the World Economic Forum survey of the future of work, number 2 in the list was creative thinking. And that speaks very much to all the topics that we've been doing here today. So if you don't protect your energy, you don't have time to think creatively. And if you're not thinking creatively, you're not learning, because as soon as you're learning things, it boosts your creative thinking. It's two sides of the same coin, thinking and creativity, and learning, 3-point coin. Anyway.
Wow. Yeah, I was actually thinking that creative thinking quite nicely connects really many topics that we have been discussing today. So it was a top-notch addition to the end. Thank you, David, for the conversation. That has really been an energizing discussion for me. You reminded us that when things are done well, we are really getting a lot of energy. And I really appreciate your perspectives you brought for us today. If this episode resonated with you, please come and be part of our conversations, our community, also going forward. And you will find the link to join our community in the episode description. So thank you, David. I look forward to upcoming conversations with you as well.
Thank you, Hannah. And energy is infectious, so I took a lot of energy from you as well.
Thank you so much.